So, the very beginning of where I found this was. Let me just click on the tweet here, just to make it absolutely sure, and let's pause that. This is from Augie RFC, and I thought it was metaphorical. I thought this was something that the new crazy meme kids were talking about. This girl took something cringe to a whole new dimension that shouldn't even be possible, believes in having sex with dead bodies, and you weirdos rewarded her with $600 a month on Patreon for simply existing and doing nothing else. I don't know. Was was Augie talking metaphorically? When you see the Marx thing, maybe it's the poor eat the rich or something like that. And I couldn't get a response out of him there, and I'd poked around. Oddly enough, I think my girlfriend Rouge is the first person who sent me the video that we'll be responding to in a minute here. This is later on down in Augie's tweet stream from the gentleman's name is Pomen. This is back in October 2018. So the original upload is from like nearly, let's say, a year and a half ago. Math's off, more than a year and a half ago. But I think this audio will speak for itself.
Opened twitter.com and was met with a post about necrophilia. My apathy and sadness completely disappeared. I instead became very driven and excited about this topic. But swallowing semen after a blowjob is much more of a health risk than having sex with a corpse. Having sex with a dead body whose family does not consent would be as immoral as stealing someone else's sex toy, but it would also be only as immoral as stealing someone else's sex toy. Don't kink shame.
Okay. That is an uncomfortable laugh. You know what? No, I'm sure there's a bit of dark, screwed up humor in there. Perhaps Maria, in her, maybe it was a sleep depraved night. Maybe they'd hit the pipe that day or had one too many beers. Like the problem is that the person I would try and cite to give Maria a mulligan would have been Amos Yee, but Amos Yee turned out to actually not only be an advocate for pedophilia, he did pursue kids. So I don't know, Maria. That's some bad optics. And here's the thing, Maria. You might have been able to bounce back for this if it weren't for, like, maybe not putting your face to it. I could sit there and say, because of assholes like me. Now, whether or not I make this video, they're gonna attach your okay liberal you to these statements, and that's never coming off. I suppose we should get back to that one sec.
A video for you guys, and it's on the moral arguments against necrophilia and why they fail. Necrophilia is disgusting. Who in their right mind would want to discuss something so abhorrent?
Okay, let's drink that in for a moment. There's something about expanding society and challenging social norms. People do it all the time. They do it with all kinds of movements. The problem with that is that people do not need to have sex with dead bodies. It doesn't serve any kind of procreation. Now, there's a bunch of other counter-arguments to that about other lifestyles and such. They're not going to enjoy being compared to necrophilia. At all. In fact, that's probably some of the first comments that you'll see in the description here. Did she imply that necrophilia on a child is okay because it's an object? They did not say that, but that's certainly something I would hit them with in an argument. That feels like a D&D argument. Well, because it's dead, it's an object now. I don't even want to comprehend that. And it's certainly something, I guess, a governing body would definitely look into. And here I'll look at it like we're about to have this discussion. So like child porn, for example. Let's say that you had a picture of a kid, and that picture itself is 18 years old. The kid in the picture doesn't age, correct? Yeah. I would assume, and yes, if you are freaking out right now that this discussion is happening, I am too. The corpse resembles a child, just in the same way that if you had a sex doll of a child, the intent here seems pretty straightforward. So no, I think absolutely not. I don't imagine many anyone in government would head down that path and condoning that. Whew. My mind just keeps shutting off and pushing away. Let's continue.
You like to fuck corpses? There must be something wrong with you. How could you have that disgusting fetish?
Well, I mean, there's the smell. Generally speaking, with a regular, healthy relationship, there's the social interaction which you will not get from something that is no longer able to breathe or talk. Most people, for example, if there's an old, I guess you'd say meme on like television shows or what have you, where like, someone has a sex doll, lol. That's to be made fun of. And I would assume those don't smell like dead bodies. I imagine those don't decay, or certainly don't decay at the rate that something used to be alive. Maria, if someone had a stuffed body, that is also a meme. For whatever reason, let's say that they weren't even having sex with it, people would all stare. Why do you have this? A stuffed loved one, a stuffed family member, a stuffed friend in your house, freeze-dried, if you will. Something you took to the taxidermy, if that were even legal, which I am going to assume in every way, shape, and form, that would not fly. People would just stare at that. Way before we got to intimacy, way before we got to anything to do with sex. Are you keeping up? Do you grasp on how there would be such an insane pushback, and all the arguments that you would need to make are going to make all those people, like, I guess if you tried to sit there and say, don't kink shame, don't do that, if LGBT were even a little smart, and I'll absolutely assume that everyone who's going to look at this, Maria the Witch, I'm assuming a lot of witches will look at this and be like, nah man, she's not with us. No, we're getting up, we're picking up our trays, and we're going over the table over there, and that would be the wise thing to do here. This would not be the hill to die on.
It's just gross and sick and twisted.
Not an argument! I believe that's Peter Molyneux. I don't know enough about Peter to chime in about the joke here, but, it's not an argument. Okay. I fully understand that from my standpoint, it is, you would be able to make an argument that I suppose normies, most people, I'm going to assume 90%, I'm going to throw that at you, and if the people in the comments of my video feel that I'm just pulling that on my ass, and I'm being completely unreasonable, and more people would be open to this, there is a point where the natural feeling and reaction of disgust and at least hesitation isn't going to allow for something. And Maria, you're not smart enough, you're not established enough, you're not influential enough, anywhere near enough to change people's minds about this. If like, I don't know, I'm trying to assume what platform would this have been okay? A college campus, I guess, where everyone's sitting around, maybe you just got back from a party, everybody blazed up, and just you're making a hypothetical, theoretical argument for the sake of discussion. You're playing devil's advocate. Perhaps that's what you're doing. Whew. You probably should have had someone else in this video as pushback. Or maybe you should have had, like, I guess, an established persona where you could have been like, oh, I'm just playing it up right now. But, whew, it seems like you're being serious.
1. No consent. Sure, the dead cannot give consent to sex, just like dildos, fleshlights, and blow-up dolls. That's not a problem, though, because we don't need the consent of inanimate objects to do...
Okay, even... Jesus, the fact that this discussion has to happen here. Let's say that you are a highly spiritual person. I happen to be Catholic myself. Even from a religious standpoint, the spirit, the soul has left the body. That is why we usually, I'm assuming, don't keep them. We don't get them freeze dried or stuffed or keep the body around the house, because it's feel object's still not the right word there. That's probably going to upset the shit out of other people. I fucking holy crap. Would you... Technically correct, but that's... Wow. How would you feel if you went to a wake and you said, let's move the object now, let's walk it on over and put it in the ground? Think, Maria.
Do whatever we please to them. Once consciousness is over, that's all a cadaver is.
Okay, let's look at that for a second. Once conscience is over, so if you're a frat boy at a party, and a girl drinks herself into a stupor, and her consciousness is no longer there because she's passed out, according to Maria here. Conscious, remind you, not my argument. That's Nito Mosquito. Is it in Maria Land? Just asking. I guess sleep and death are. I think some of your wordings. Why would you do this argument? Why would you head down this route?
An inanimate object with no volition and incapable of experiencing any sort of trauma from non-consensual activities. 2.
I guess the body could still absorb trauma. As for the family of the deceased, it is beyond disrespectful that one could assume that you have lowered someone's standing. Imagine if everyone in town knew that some weirdo, if I could call it that, had sex with a family member's body, and that's gonna follow them around. Not only am I going to assume that this is a wrong on a criminal level, I feel like there's probably a civil means to sue somehow that you have caused damage and harm to that family's good name. I am not a legal expert, but that's certainly something that people should and would try, I imagine, with a lawyer. It would be not the nuttiest thing.
Family of the deceased. The shock or distress that might be experienced by the family of the deceased is an argument often made, but easily dismissed. We do not typically consider the reaction of other people when deciding on the morality of an action. We only consider the harm inflicted on...
Okay. So, we're worried about family. God, why do I feel the need to take devil's advocate here? If I were Maria, I guess I'd try and argue, and keep in mind, I think necrophilia is bad. That should not be legalized in any way, shape, or form. It should not be argued for morally, but if you were trying to sidestep family, I guess you'd look for the body of a homeless man or woman, which even then, holy crap, I can't see socially that would go over like a fart in church, wouldn't it, Maria? Or I guess a coven.
On those involved in the action. It doesn't matter that homophobes or racists get upset by homosexual or interracial relationships.
Okay, so once upon a time ago, it did matter, Maria. Once upon a time ago, it did matter that homosexual or homophobes or racists, or whatever you want to call anyone who doesn't agree with the homosexual lifestyle, which is completely different from necrophilia. Necrophiles, if there were enough people to supposedly have this movement, Jesus Christ, would have to start to have smart and intelligent people come forward. They would need, for the lack of a better word here, their own Martin Luther King, their own well-spoken person to establish the necrophile lifestyle. No, no, that was that was. I'm not gonna explain that laugh. That's me, my insanity breaking, whatever. Whew.
As long as all the parties involved in those relationships consent to them, in this case the only party being the necrophiliac, they will be considered morally acceptable.
Okay, so, like, how would you even go about this, like, in the normal circumstances? Let's say, someone passes away, is the necrophile breaking into someone's tomb, casket, plot of land and digging them up? Because that's already wrong. The The only way I guess you could circumvent that is if a necrophile waited around for a friend or a family member to expire. And then, got down to business. If your first knee-jerk reaction is when you were watching someone, I guess, have a heart attack and getting a stiffy suddenly because of, think of the possibilities! Yeah, Maria. That's not cool. That's not kosher. That's, it's if you were, let's say, let's go with politics right now. If someone, let's say someone on the right or left sat there and said, I had a steel iron woody while I was watching my political opponent have a heart attack on stage, without them having an implication that they intended to have sex with the body, that would still make people uncomfortable, because one could loosely infer as opposed to actually going ahead and going out and doing the deed. Yeah.
3. Health risks. Corpses do not intrinsically pose a health risk. The health risks that corpses might pose are those arising from improper disposal or highly infectious diseases contracted by the deceased. That means that if the body of a healthy person is adequately handled by a mortician, it is no more dangerous than a living partner who might have an STD.
So that's a weird implication. So as part of this whole process, we're assuming that the bodies are getting embalmed and touched up. So in this Maria utopia, morticians are part-time pimps. Is that what's going on here? That they present some of their subjects, they're allowed to do so, and rent them out to prospective Johns, if you were. Is anyone else just tuning out and falling back and going, no? Imagine having that in town, the freaking the mortician, or whatever, just between a grocery store and a cleaners, and there's not just people going in for sex, but people going in with sex with the dead in everyday life. Just no big problem. That's the world you want. I'm not saying it's impossible. I'm not saying that that's something that people would potentially adapt to. I'm saying that's probably a world that people would not want to cultivate, even if it were possible. Even I can't imagine that people would want to sink time into making that legal, making that morally accepted. That's just a really poor decision.
And we don't even consider exposing yourself to STDs immoral, even if it is unwise.
Kinda sorta do. People kinda sorta do. I think the kink is called gifting. You either go around and get or receive STDs. So yes, that is immoral. If that's not exactly what you said, I don't feel like I made a massive jump there, Maria. You will forgive me if I took you slightly out of context, and naturally I'm prepared to have you come on to a stream to explain that perhaps that you had low blood sugar that day. You went through a difficult situation, and this was like, I have to have content today. Yeah, you did say that at the beginning, that you had to have something done. Maybe you were half giggling in the background and trying to do this as straight-faced as possible.
The only potential issue present in all corpses is the production of cadaverine and putrescin, substances that are
I've never heard the term cadaverine. I've definitely heard of putresids.
Toxic if ingested in large doses. However, they are much less toxic than spermine, a substance found in semen. So it seems that swallowing semen after a blowjob is much more of a health risk than having sex with a corpse.
Okay.
4.
Be that as it may, I can't imagine. Did you like just not test this and bounce it off like some friends first? That, hey, look, swallowing semen is worse for you than taking bodily fluids from a dead person. And nothing in your brain just said, well, you know what? You're not stuttering or stamming. The audio seems fairly well edited, so it's not like you just said it once. You probably had more editing in this video here that I'm going to do in response to you. And you went, listened, re-listened, put it chopped together, made it a polished enough product, unless you just, maybe you're a really good speaker, you did one take, no fakes, slapped the audio on screen and you were done. But that would that'd be like 2 or 3 times where the audio would touch your ears and you went, aha, yes, I agree with this. I rubbed your hands together and said, yes, I've done a good job here today. Is this like high averagely wrong, or was this you on like a really good day? I'm very curious.
He writes, I couldn't find very clear information on who owns dead bodies. Either way, it would be reasonable to argue that the body should belong to the family, like the rest of the deceased.
So this is a really morbid question. Certainly don't want to say anything interesting or fascinating, so I don't get lumped in with the very wrong people. From a legal perspective, it is a very interesting question because I guess in normal circumstances, again, but we're not dealing with normal circumstances, if you gave someone something, it would typically normally be theirs. But a cemetery, I can't legally then turn around and sell that body off, or at least that would be what I would assume. Yeah? Like if someone like, we put your body in the ground, okay, the family's gone, and we're going to dig it up and sell it off to like whatever scientific or whatever blah blah blah, or Maria's weird utopia or nightmare world, depending on who you ask, that probably wouldn't fly. So that's a weird thing to think, that when you put a body in the ground, the original people who put it there, or that family, owns it still. It's never occurred to me. It's a really morbid thought, and people usually don't like to think of, how do I put it? They don't like to think of cemeteries in their regular day-to-day life. I imagine even morbid goth kids, if they even still have those, would probably not think about that. But now that you've heard this video, that'll be rocking around on the old noggin, and I'll get the old almonds roasting.
State, and only in cases where there is no next of kin should the state be given those property rights. Whether or not that actually is what happens
So, wait, Maria, instead of morticians pimping out the dead bodies, you want the state to basically set up a bordello for the dead. Heavens, what state would that be? Normally I can't wait to jump and make fun of the left, but even I don't want to dwell on that long enough to go, I don't think I hate anyone enough, or any faction, to say, they'd go for that. Or maybe just after listening to you, my mind can't focus and function and process on to the next tone for me to make a proper insult towards anyone else. You've dominated the stage, Maria.
Really matter, because I'm examining the moral debate, not the legal one. Thus, if the family of the deceased does not allow necrophilia, which I would...
Well, we have to also talk about the practical application. And again, you've stated that well, the bodies have to get processed through a mortician that who would house and maintain it. Where are people just going to have this Norman Bates style? They're going to take the body home after purchasing it in this world and stick it in a chair? Because that also floats into the realm of morality. They're kind of one and the same in this situation. If people weren't morally upset about the bodies, yeah, a society's morality is reflected in its laws to some form and degree, and I don't feel that I'm not going out on a massive limb here to say that, what you can and can't do to a body is highly reflected in damn near every society I can think of. And granted, I've never left America. Maybe I'm completely off the mark. That's why we have a comments section. You guys can all correct me down below if I'm just entirely missing the mark here.
Think silly, that's their prerogative. But then the moral problem becomes one of property rights, as opposed to one of necrophilia per se. Having sex with a dead body whose family does not consent would be as immoral as stealing someone else's sex toy.
How would they get access to the body, Maria? You haven't established. That's the other weird thing, and I don't feel that even... I think this is the first time where someone's even come that close to that discussion in my life. And I think that I will go the rest of my life. I'm going to give people the benefit of the doubt until, I guess some troll watches this and decides to make an account and start to make those arguments. Watch. If there's a stupid idea, there'll be someone who will elaborate on it as almost a Rule 34 for idiots. Replacing all sexuality with stupid ideas and expansion thereof. Let's call that Rule 0, unless some things like that is picked. Rule 0 on the internet. If there's a stupid idea, there's someone who's prepared to make a mythos or a longer, detailed version thereof it.
But it would also be only as immoral as stealing someone else's sex toy. 5. Psychology of the necrophiliac. Even though necrophilia has not been very much studied due to its rarity and the taboo that prevents necrophiliacs from coming forward, it is currently featured in the DSM-5 as a paraphilia, a condition characterized by abnormal sexual desires.
Why would we want to change that? Seems to work straightforward. I think people are very comfortable assuming people who want to have sex with the dead are undesirable. What would we stand to gain? Do you understand that the more people that you let in with more divergent and at least what considered to be obscene is going to cause a pushback, if you will? Let's say that you are far left, Miss You in the Marx t-shirt over there. You assume that we could just get it all in the door, and then these horrible bigoted racists, there we go, we got the politics in the door. These horrible bigoted racists are losing, and then you'll just be able to, drag things down. No, it's the thing. Arguments like this, I would imagine, are why I assume the left is losing. Mwah. I would probably try to be a bit more selective. Might be a good idea.
Typically involving extreme or dangerous activities. This article calls attention to that lack of data, but cites a 1989 study to support that necrophilia is clearly dangerous, since unlike other non-paraphilic fetishes, it has led to murders. Further academic investigation is indeed required, but out of the 87 necrophiliacs categorized by the study, only 14 were in the homicidal category.
1 second. Let's play that again.
Necrophiliacs categorized by the is indeed required, but out of the 87 necrophiliacs categorized by the study, only 14 were in...
Okay. So, out of 87, only 14. Let's see if we can crunch some numbers here. I'm gonna have to round down or round up. Certainly more than a tenth. Would you not agree? because 10 out of 100 is 1/10. 13, 14%. Rough estimate. Super rough. What benefit would we gain from letting that in, though? Let's say that only 13 to 14% are dangerous. What would we gain as a society for letting that in the door? You're only cheapening a movement for acceptance. You're only going to make it far more difficult for literally everyone else involved. And I do understand that I would assume that necrophiles are a small, minute percent of the population. And of that small, minute percent of that population, and even more small, minute percent of the population, which, let's say out of 1 million people, only about 1,000 necrophiles exist. I'm just completely pulling a random bullshit stat out of my head. Out of those 1,000, 100 would be harmful? Yeah, that's 10%. 100 people out of 1,000 would be vile, vicious murderers. You guys could live with that, couldn't you? There's a lot of sarcasm in my voice. I'm not really condoning for that. Yeah, I think people would flip the fuck out. Out of 10,000, 1,000. Do you see what I'm saying? If you keep scaling. I don't know how many the actual number is, but when you really consider what 10% is, yeah, that's very horrifying.
In the homicidal category, which indicates the danger is not inherent to necrophilia, so these murders can be condemned separately from the sexual practices.
Why? Why would they be? I clearly established that the number would be quite sizable. I suppose if you said out of 10 people, only one of them would be a murder, I guess that's far less creepy. I would need to see the relative number, I guess. Even then, I wouldn't want to hang out I wouldn't want to know that there's 10 necrophiles in my town. Even if you could get the number way the hell down there. Any number higher than 0 would be too much.
Themselves. Conclusion. And so, all the night tide I lie down by the side of my darling, my life and my bride, in her sepulchre there by the sea, in her tomb by the sounding sea. Don't kink shame.
You've made it easier to make fun of everyone else's kinks, Maria. You have gone in the exact opposite direction that you have intended to do. You have discredited and hurt your name and the name of your family, assuming that will probably leak out there someday. You have hurt your movement. The fact that you have put witch in there, if you are actually Wiccan, or I've botched that, I do apologize. Everything around you has been hurt by this. I don't even know what I'd call it. This is a whole giant pile of yikes and no. And it is funny to laugh to see whether you want to call this person an e-girl, a simp. Supposedly, if you listen to Augie's thoughts here, that the series of people decide to give this person over $600. Yes, I do think that that's funny. Horrifying, but funny. Wow. Dear Internet, please try harder next time. Thank you. Fuck you. Bye.